Now, I don't know what you're like when you go on a journey. When I go on a journey, I want to get there. A 1-year delay in the middle of a journey would drive me crazy. Don't you think that would frustrate you too? I mean, these people want to get there to the land of Canaan, and a year later they're still in the desert and they've made precious little progress.
Welcome to Open the Bible with Pastor Colin Smith. I'm David Pick. Glad you could be with us today. And Colin, I'd hate that. Getting held up on a journey is so frustrating. And that's what the Israelites experienced. And we might expect that to cause a good deal of grumbling directed at their leadership. And that's what we find actually caused rebellion.
Yeah, very important and often neglected story in the Bible as to how this man with some others rose up in rebellion against Moses. And, you know, it speaks to us very powerfully today. I think we are experiencing two problems across the broad scene in church life. One is that some churches are becoming, it seems, more and more authoritarian, and that's not good. But the other problem is that many Christians are becoming less and less willing to have any authority in their lives. You know, I'm the one who decides what's right for me and who's ever going to tell me what to do, and so forth and so on. And especially in our culture, that can become quite rampant. Now, the second problem is the one that we're looking at today, that here among the people who were frustrated in one way or another, there was this discontent and then this rebellion that rose up, not against an authoritarian leader, but against such a meek man as Moses, God's man, a godly man. And here's the story of people who would not accept his leadership.
So we find that story in Numbers chapter 16. So I hope you'll join us in your Bible if you can, as we begin the message, Submit to Authority. Here's Colin.
Now, I invite you to open your Bibles today at Numbers and chapter 16, where we find the story of Korah. And of all of the characters in this series, he is the one who took the most obvious and dramatic plunge to disaster, as we'll see this morning. We're following this series because we all want to make sure that we put our lives together in a way that's marked by wisdom and success. And our aim in this series is to learn from fools, to see where other people have gone wrong, and therefore to avoid their mistakes. And so far we've made 3 discoveries. If you want to avoid a plunge to disaster, number 1, learn to deal with your anger. Remember the story of Cain. He became angry with God and his anger smoldered towards his brother, and sin was crouching at the door and Cain went down. Then secondly, we saw establish true values. That's where Esau went wrong. He saw no value in his place in the purpose of God and gave away something of priceless value, ending his life with a loud and bitter cry because he could not get it back. And then last week we saw live what you believe. That was Balaam's problem. You remember that he received the word of God, but he did not act on it. He lived a double life, and eventually that tore him apart, and he died an enemy of God and his people. Now today we come to a 4th very important principle in the Bible. And the lesson from the story of Korah is very straightforward. Submit yourself to authority. If you want to avoid a plunge to disaster, then learn to submit yourself to authority. Now, in order to understand this story, you might like to have your Bible open in the book of Numbers. And as we take up the story here, we find that the people are frustrated because they've gone on a journey from Egypt to Canaan, which should not have taken very long, but they have experienced nothing less than a whole year's delay. Remember that Moses has brought them out of Egypt. It took them 3 months to get to Mount Sinai, and then they spent an entire year at that one location. Moses had 2 long absences up the mountain. The people became very frustrated waiting for him. They then had a 7-month period in which they worked on making the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant. Now, I don't know what you're like when you go on a journey. When I go on a journey, I want to get there. Obviously, we have stops. When our family stops on a journey, we have this routine. Well, you know, how long are we going to stop for? Is this a 15-minute one or is it an hour one or what? And we decide, okay, this is a 15-minute pit stop. Off to the restrooms, go to the shop. Let's be back here in 15 minutes. I'll tell you, a 1-year delay in the middle of a journey would drive me crazy. Don't you think that would frustrate you too? I mean, these people want to get there to the land of Canaan, and a year later they're still in the desert and they've made precious little progress. Secondly, as they begin to move forward, because Numbers tells us the story of how they broke camp from Sinai and moved forward, chapter 10 and verse 11 tells us of the beginning of their progress again. Can you imagine what it must have been like to travel through a desert with 2 million people moving at the pace of the slowest? When my wife's side of the family gets together in the summer, wonderful occasions, there are 26 of us all together. And when there's a kind of a decision that takes a long time to come about, that we're going to go to the beach for a morning, it can take half a morning to get 26 people organized to go to the beach. You know what that's like? Can you imagine being one of 2 million people on a journey going at the pace of the slowest? That would drive the type A personalities absolutely berserk, don't you think? So what you have here is a growing climate of frustration. A year's delay on a comparatively straightforward journey, followed by very, very slow progress. And then thirdly, added to that, we discover from chapter 11 and verse 1, if we take up the story there, that the people are beginning to complain. The people complained about their hardship in the hearing of the Lord. Now you see, with all the slow progress, people are becoming frustrated. They're fed up, and they're looking for someone to blame. And of course, that is always a vulnerable time for any leader. This was not an easy time for Moses. In addition to all these frustrations, there were growing tensions within Moses' own family. Isn't it amazing how troubles come together? Moses is trying to give leadership to the people of God. He's trying to sort out these endless complaints from the people. He comes home absolutely exhausted at night. He wants to relax in his tent, and then he discovers that he can't because there are a whole bunch of troubles in his own family. Miriam and Aaron, chapter 12 and verse 1, began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife. Classic family dynamic. Sister and brother can't get on with Moses' wife, and he's strung out there in the middle. They didn't think he should have married her, they didn't like her, and Moses finds himself in all of this tension as well. Not only that, but Miriam and Aaron were losing confidence in Moses' leadership. Look at chapter 12 and verse 2. Has the Lord spoken only to Moses, they asked? Hasn't he also spoken through us? Now remember, Aaron was the high priest and Miriam had prophesied when they came over the Red Sea. And so they're beginning to ask this question. God speaks through Moses, yes, but doesn't he also speak through us? And God came down, verse 5, in a pillar of cloud and spoke directly to them on this issue. Notice what he says. Numbers 12:6. When a prophet of the Lord is among you, I reveal myself to him in visions. I speak to him in dreams. But that is not true of my servant Moses. With Moses, it's different. And notice what God says. With Moses, I speak face to face. He sees the form of the Lord. So he is special in a way that is different even from the prophets of the Old Testament. I speak to Moses face to face. He sees the form of God. So why then are you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the Lord's anger came against Miriam, and we're told that she was covered with leprosy. Moses immediately prayed for her to be healed, and she was healed. But God said that she must spend 7 days outside of the camp, as any leper would have had to do. You know what that means? Moses' sister was under what we would call church discipline. Now you can imagine the conversations that took place over breakfast with that one. You hear? Moses got a lot of problems in his own family now. Even his sister's under church discipline. A lot of problems in that family, you know. So this was a difficult time of mounting frustration, a long delay at Mount Sinai, moving at the pace of the slowest, a lot of complaints among the people that were being turned against Moses, and increasing problems even within Moses' own family that were becoming the matter of public gossip and even of contempt. And then on top of all that, we come to the best-known story in the book of Numbers. Chapter 13 is the story about the spies who go out to Canaan. And they are commissioned to bring back a report on how a future strategy can be adopted to take the land that the Lord has promised. So they set up this vision committee. That's what I like to call the 12 spies. And the vision committee meets and it does its work and it comes back and says, well, the future can't be done. That's what they say, in effect. And they give their gloomy report not to Moses, but to all the people. And the result is that the whole community now is thrown into a deep crisis. They've spent all this time in the desert, and now the vision committee tells them that the thing they hoped for in the future simply isn't going to happen. And so in chapter 14 and verse 1 we read, "That night all the people of the community raised their voices, they wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, 'If only we had died in Egypt.' And verse 4, they said to each other, 'We should choose a leader, and we should go back to Egypt.'" Now that's the climate of frustration that's developing throughout the story of the book of Numbers. And whenever you have a climate of frustration, whether it be in a business, on a board, in a family, in a church, in a school, wherever it may be, where you have a climate of frustration, you have potential for division and for conflict. And that's exactly what we find happening here in this story.
You're listening to Open the Bible with Pastor Colin Smith and a message called Submit to Authority. It's from our series Deck Chairs on the Titanic, where we're looking at 8 characters in the Bible and how they didn't deal with sin in their lives and all ended up plunging to disaster. Don't forget, if you ever miss one of the series, you can always catch up or go back and listen again by coming online to our website, openthebible.org.uk. There you'll find all the messages which have already gone out on air. And you'll also find them as a podcast if you go to your favourite podcast site, search for Open the Bible UK, and subscribe if you want to receive regular updates. Back to the message now. We're in Numbers chapter 16. Here again is Colin.
Now, as we come to Numbers in chapter 16 then, try and imagine 3 men sitting round a fire outside their tents in the desert. Their names are Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. They're talking about Moses. Somehow they always ended up talking about Moses when they got together. It was their favorite subject. And they didn't have much good to say about him either. Korah was a Levite. It seems from what Moses says to him later that he wasn't happy that the priests came only from one family among the Levites, and that was the family of Aaron. Dathan and Abiram, you'll notice there, were Reubenites. Reuben, of course, was the oldest of Jacob's 12 sons, and so it would not be surprising for the Reubenites to continue to feel that leadership should come from their clan, the oldest son. And of course, Moses came from the tribe of Levi. They had different agendas, these 3 men, but they found common ground in their dislike of Moses and Aaron. As far as they were concerned, Moses was a disaster. Of course, he doesn't know what he's doing, Korah would say. Yeah, he's out of touch. He just doesn't know what people are thinking and saying these days, said Dathan as he rolled his eyes. I don't know who he thinks he is anyway, Abiram would say. Moses couldn't do anything right in their eyes. They didn't like him. And of course, the fact that he had so much authority really stuck in their throats. And that's where the trouble began. And I want you to notice today 4 stages in the conflict that we have here. There are 4 distinct elements or stages in the way in which this dispute develops. And if you find yourself in a situation of conflict, you may find it very helpful to identify these 4 elements. It may help you to understand and respond to what is going on. Notice first that it begins with a matter of attitude, verse 1. Dathan, Korah, and Abiram became insolent, we read, and rose up against Moses. Notice that phrase, they became insolent. In other words, this little group of 3 men developed an attitude towards Moses. And everything in the story flows from this development of a bad attitude in that small group. That was where the plunge to disaster began. It was the way they talked about the leader when they were round the campfire. Now, that kind of backchat, of course, can go on in any staff room, in any school, in any board, in any business, in any family. They became insolent. Now, that seems like a small thing, but I want you to notice that it was the beginning of big trouble. Now, none of us, of course, likes authority. That's just instinctive within us. And so it's not surprising that when there was a little group who began to flex their muscles against Moses, there were other people who were drawn towards them. And if you look in verse 2, you will find that very soon there were 250 Israelite men, all of them well-known community leaders who'd been appointed as members of the council in Israel, and they were ready to stand with these 3 men. So very quickly, this movement moved from a small group with an attitude to a more organized campaign against Moses, the leader. There would have been breakfast meetings to talk about it. There would have been careful canvassing to see which council members were with us and which ones were not with us. Eventually, it was established that there were 250 who had lost confidence in Moses. Imagine that. 250 leaders had lost confidence in Moses. And they all thought that it was time for a change, and they thought that this was the time that they should go and speak. Notice, secondly, the conviction that they expressed, verse 3. They came as a group to oppose Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You've gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" Now, of course, that was a unique challenge in Israel to Moses' authority. Remember that God had said, as we saw to Miriam, that Moses saw the form of God. Nobody else saw that in Israel. That God spoke to Moses face to face. That was not true of anybody else in Israel. But Korah was convinced that everybody could come to God in their own way. Why should we be restricted to what God says to us through Moses? Why should the priests only come from the family of Aaron? What's so special about them? Are not all the people holy? Is not the Lord among them? That's a conviction. Thirdly, look at the motivation. Because behind this conviction so clearly expressed, there was a motivation. And it was very simply that Korah was not happy with the role that he'd been given among the people of God. He wanted more. Moses identifies this in verse 9. "Isn't it enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the Israelite community? He has brought you," verse 10, "and your fellow Levites near him, but you are trying to get the priesthood too. It is against the Lord," Moses says, "that you and all your followers have banded together." So Moses is very clear about the motivation. "I hear what you're saying," he says, "but I want you to know that the very clear motivation in this is that you want a bigger role for yourself. That's what's at stake here." Korah wanted a bigger role for himself than God had given. That's the motivation. Now, fourthly, look at the issue of communication. It's very interesting that when Moses was dealing with this trouble in the community, he spoke with Korah separate from the other 2. And the reason that he wisely did that, of course, is that though they were combining their forces, they actually had different agendas. Korah was primarily concerned about the issue of the priesthood, Dathan and Abiram were concerned about broader issues of leadership to do with Moses. And so Moses tried to set up a second meeting with these other two, Dathan and Abiram. And notice verse 12, what happens. They simply refused to come. They wouldn't talk. And when they wouldn't talk, what happened from there on is that the discussion degenerated to a matter of lobbing slogans from a distance and misrepresenting the position of Moses. Verse 12, we're not going to come. We won't meet with you. Verse 13, look at this. Isn't it enough that you brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the desert? You realize they're saying that Egypt, where they were slaves, was now apparently a land flowing with milk and honey. I mean, that is a bit rich, don't you think? Moses, you brought us out of a land flowing with milk and honey. How quickly they've forgotten where they were. And then verse 14, moreover, you haven't brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey. Well, that's even richer, bearing in mind that Moses had wanted to lead them into Canaan and the people had refused on the basis of the gloomy report of the Vision Committee. Well, now, when you find yourself dealing with conflict, here are 4 things to look for. Ask them about yourself, as well as about the person with whom you find yourself in tension. What's the attitude here? What is the conviction that is being expressed? Try and identify what is the fundamental thing you are saying. What is the fundamental conviction of the other person? And how's the communication? Is there listening going on, or are we at the level of lobbing slogans from a distance and misrepresenting other positions? These are great questions to ask of yourself as well as of another person when you find yourself in a situation of conflict and of tension. They are always the fundamental issues: attitude, convictions, motivations, and communication, or the lack of it.
You've been listening to Pastor Colin Smith on Open the Bible with a message called Submit to Authority. It's part of our series, Deck Chairs on the Titanic, all about 8 characters from the Bible who failed to deal with sin in their own lives and plunged to disaster as a result. Don't forget, if you ever miss one of the series, you can catch up or go back and listen again online at our website, openthebible.org.uk, or find us as a podcast on all the main podcast sites. Search for Open the Bible UK and subscribe if you want to receive regular reminders. Here's Open the Bible's Amanda Cunningham to talk about a special Open the Bible event this Easter.
How will you reach out to your local community this Easter with the good news of the gospel? How will you inspire awe in your church family at the wonder of the cross when the story is familiar? Open the Bible UK would love to help you. We filmed a 1-actor, 1-hour performance of Colin's well-known book, Heaven, How I Got Here, the story of the thief on the cross. It's a powerful gospel message, and we're making the film available to you for free. Alongside it, we have also created a complete Easter resource pack, including event artwork and an event guide, designed as an easy evangelistic event for inviting friends or the local community, especially those hesitant about attending a church service. It's also perfect for small groups to watch and discuss during Holy Week. To find out more, go to openthebible.org.uk.
At Open the Bible, we welcome contact with our listeners. You can email us by using the contact form on our website, openthebible.org.uk/contact. You can write to us at Open the Bible, PO Box 1420, Cheltenham, GL50 9PG, or you can phone us on 0330 335 8089. If we're not available when you call, leave a message for us and we'll return your call. All of these contact details are available on our website, openthebible.org.uk. Open the Bible is supported entirely by our listeners. That's people just like you. And if that's something you haven't done to date, but if you're thinking about doing it, If you're able to begin a new direct debit in the amount of £5 per month or more, or a one-off gift of £50 or more, we'd love to thank you by sending you a copy of Pastor Colin's book, Heaven, How I Got Here, the story of the thief on the cross, and also a small booklet entitled How Can I Be Sure of Heaven, along with an Open the Bible pen and bookmark. These items are our gift to you for beginning to support Open the Bible financially. Full details, terms and conditions are on our website, and you can give online. For Open the Bible and Pastor Colin Smith, I'm David Pick, and I hope you'll be able to join us again next time on Open the Bible. When you're encountering conflict, how can you cut through to get to the heart of the issues? Discover 4 questions to ask yourself. That's next time on Open the Bible.